This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com and constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and it's my job to help you, the construction business owner, eliminate chaos, systematize your business, and maximize revenue. I've got a great interview for you today with Yehudi Gaffen. He goes by Gaff, and you're going to learn about why do megaprojects fail. Gaff has spent the last 25 or 30 years working on mega projects. And by mega projects, I'm talking about projects in the hundreds of millions and in some cases billions of dollars. Pretty fascinating stuff. Here's what you're going to learn. Why do mega projects fail? What is the quadruple bottom line that he looks for in a project? Some interesting advice for you as a contractor. What are some of the red flags that he looks for when selecting a contractor based on his experience of sourcing billions of dollars of projects? Why do Navy SEALs make good project managers? He's got some advice for you when you're making your presentation to a client. And then I asked him, who's the one person on a project team that you would question? And he talks about who he would question on a project team that's making a proposal and how would he do it. And his answers may surprise you. So great interview. Lots of really practical stuff for you as contractors from a guy who has, again, sourced billions of dollars of work. A couple of resources I want to get into your hands and make sure you know about before we get into that interview. First of all, I want to talk about very quickly 7 reasons that you as a business owner or a leader should go to a business conference. Number 1, see the big picture. Okay, sometimes you get so stuck in the weeds that you can't see the big picture. You can't see the forest for the trees. Getting out of the weeds, getting away from the dumpster fire that could be your business or your project is sometimes all you really need to be able to see what the real problem is. Number 2 is something that I hear all the time from business owners, which is this, quote, I don't have anybody to talk to. The only people around me who understand what I'm going through are my competitors, and I can't talk to them. So getting to a business conference with other people just like you who have the same challenges as you, but they're not your competitors, is incredibly valuable. Number 3 is what I call the desert island effect. The desert island effect is when you don't know what you don't know. Maybe you've been in your business for the last 10 years, 20 years. Maybe you've never been a part of another business. You don't know how anybody else is doing it. So you don't know what you don't know. You're like you're on a desert island. And sometimes just being around other people and hearing how they've already found out, how they've already solved problems is incredibly powerful. Number 4 is you'll find out how have other people already solved problems. What would it be like if you could, maybe you're trying to solve some problem, what would it be like if you could shave a month off the learning curve? What if you could avoid a really expensive mistake just by talking to somebody who's already done it? Well, that's one of the reasons to go to a conference is to rub elbows with people who have already tackled the problems that you're trying to solve. So you can avoid mistakes, avoid expensive, painful learning curve. That's number 4. Number 5, clarity is power. Clarity is power. And when you go to a business conference, you get away from the dumpster fire that is your business and you extract yourself from the day-to-day, you'll get clarity on what's going on. And the conference that I'm going to tell you about, one of the things that you're going to walk away from is the ability to discern the root cause of your symptoms. So having clarity on what the actual root cause is going to keep you from addressing the symptoms and wasting time treating symptoms and actually spend your time solving the root cause. Clarity on root cause is powerful. Number 6, you're going to be inspired by other people. When you get around other like-minded people, maybe there are people who are a couple of years ahead of you, maybe there are some people who are a few years behind you, but you're going to be inspired to take action and do the things that you know you need to do by being around other people who push you, people who are, maybe you can develop relationships with these people and stay connected with them. Maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but being around other people who are taking action is going to motivate you, give you the kick in the butt that maybe you need to do what you know you need to do. And then getting away from your business is going to help you achieve number 7. This number 7 reason to go to a business conference, which is to focus and prioritize. You're going to walk away from this particular conference that I'm going to tell you about with clear-cut action plans, or as I like to call them, an execution plan on what you need to do. Focus and prioritize, because not every problem is created equal. Not every opportunity is created equal. It's really important that you prioritize and you know exactly what you need to focus on. So, 7 reasons to attend a business conference. I'm going to be doing several business conferences just like this, specifically for construction business owners and leaders in 2020. The first one is coming up in Vegas. It is on January 20th, 2020. It's the day before the International Builders Show begins. So if you're going to come to the Builders Show, then come a day early, spend one full day with myself and a bunch of other construction business owners and leaders. Bring your operations manager, bring your project manager. There are people who are bringing their entire team to the advance. You're going to learn about leadership, root cause analysis, getting to the real problem, the real root cause of your problems, and developing execution plans on how to get where you want to be. To get all the details on the advance in Vegas and then the other upcoming events, maybe you're listening to this after January 20th or you can't make it to Vegas, all the details on the other advances I'll be hosting throughout the year will be at constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance, ADVANCE, constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance. Or if it would be easier for you to send a text, send me a text and I'll get all the details into your hands. Text to me at 859-667-2015. But I'm telling you, this is going to be good. If you want to hear from other construction business owners who have attended advances in the past, go to constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance. The next resource I want to get in your hands before we get to the interview with Gaff is Field Chat. If you manage a team or you manage projects, then your job is really to be a broker of information, to get the right information to the right people at the right time at the right level of detail. That's your job as a leader, whether you are a business owner, a project manager, a superintendent, a foreman. If you lead people, your job is to broker information. And it's really important that you have an organized system for your communication. So if you're looking for a way to do that, maybe you're chasing bits of paper and text messages and emails, then I would encourage you to check out Field Chat. It is the ultimate text messaging platform for construction sites, period. It alleviates what I call the Bermuda Triangle of information between the field, the office, and the client, where information and decisions disappear. They just disappear, and nobody knows where they went. And you end up with these finger pointing and he said, she said situations. So if you want a simple way to organize all of your instant communications by project and to give you a searchable history of all those messages, you got to go check out fieldchat.com. And as a Construction Leading Edge podcast listener, you're eligible for a nice little discount from our friends at Field Chat. So you can get a 15% off discount. Go to fieldchat.com/edge and check that out today. Now, let's get into that interview with Gaffen and learn about why do mega projects fail. All right, Gaff, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Let's jump in. We're going to talk about mega projects. What are some of the misconceptions about mega projects? What is a mega project? Where do they come from? But a great place to start would be this question. Why do some mega projects fail? And maybe what's an example of a mega project that has failed?
Great. I'm pleased to be here. So maybe just to start out, to define what I feel constitutes a mega project, and it's, in my mind, a project that's many hundreds of millions of dollars, usually in the billions of dollars, first of all. And the second component of a mega project is that it has multiple uses built into it, so it's not just one use. or it has significant technical complexities built into it, whether it's building a tunnel or a major bridge or items like that. That's kind of what I would define as a mega project. Your second question, and I would say usually what's behind it is what Jim Collins refers to as a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, audacious goal. So it's usually a goal that people would say you're crazy. I mean, that's going to be almost impossible to achieve or very difficult to achieve. So it usually has associated with it a vision that's pretty transformational or out there, and is not something that's the run of the mill that's been done before. So I would say those are kind of the two bookends or cornerstones of a mega project that I've seen in my experience in my 40 plus years in the business. What was the rest? What were the other parts of your question? If you can just maybe reiterate them.
Sure. Why do mega projects fail, and what's an example of one such project that failed?
Yeah. So I would say my experience of what I think is usually at the base of a mega project failing is that the visionary who's usually behind it, the driver, the person who's really there to deal with challenges as they come up, and there's always challenges every single day as a big project like this works forward. My experience has shown that when that person gets taken out of the equation, that's usually the beginning of the end. And so I would say that's probably the foremost item I've seen for that happening. And I think it can happen because of many different reasons. I mean, it could happen that the person dies or passes away, kind of the worst case. It could happen that politics intervene and the person gets taken out of the position of driving the project, and other reasons, I think. But to me, the visionary and the individual who's really taken on this big, hairy, audacious goal and has committed to seeing it through is really the fuel that makes a mega project ultimately makes it succeed. I think a project, you asked for an example, I think a project that's very close to my heart and one that I personally managed was known as the Orange County Great Park. It was a project in Irvine, California. It was a project that grew out of the base closure, the military base closures, where the Marine Corps decided to close Marine Base El Toro. And this goes back a couple of decades, and it resulted in the city of Irvine fighting to reject a proposal to put in an international airport and instead create a transformational regional park, very similar to what Central Park is in New York, but to do that on the West Coast as an alternative to the airport. It went through a number of ballot initiatives. Eventually, the city got it done, put out an international proposal to select teams to come up with this vision. It was very heavily competed. I think 40 firms initially were brought together. It got cut to 20-some, eventually cut to 7 as a short list. And our team, which was a team of Gaffen, my company, and an incredibly creative architect out of New York, Ken Smith, a landscape architect, won the actual competition, which was adjudicated by 2 professional juries and the public. And what was very rewarding was that our team was unanimously, and our proposal was unanimously selected by all 3 juries. We commenced work on it in 2006 and worked through when the recession started in 2009, roughly, at which time the Great Recession, which hit, placed financial constraints that caused the project to slow down. But the work that we had done over that period had won almost every single legitimate design award in the country. It was highly acclaimed work that the team was very committed to. We had a team of 40 plus consultants working on it, from civil engineers, traffic engineers, environmental engineers, design architects, landscape architects, financial consultants. It was about in total, the horizontal development was in excess of $1 billion, and with all the vertical development, the project would have probably exceeded $3 to $4 billion in terms of what it could be. The community was very supportive of it, but there was still, and the individual who really visioned this and drove it was originally a mayor of Irvine, Larry Agron, and his city council, who really came up with this vision, which was amazing to do this. And he was really, when I say the visionary, the person behind it, was really Larry, who really put all this together. Unfortunately, there was also significant politics that was swirling around it, because the airport fight to put an international airport at El Toro was obviously, from a business perspective and from the region's perspective, a pretty compelling case, because today to get a regional airport built is almost impossible in an urban area. And El Toro, being that it was 7 square miles, was uniquely suited to do that. But Irvine, in which this area was located, obviously was against that, because it would totally affect the quality of life in Irvine, and they fought hard to stop it. So the bigger community that wanted the airport was very upset that this had happened, but it moved forward and then stopped. And what ultimately happened was that the politics changed in Irvine, and a new majority came into power at the city council, and essentially through various strategies, including an unfounded audit, in quotes, that they did, despite the fact that the project had been audited 9 times during its life, undertook its own audit, which was not an audit. It was essentially it was to discredit any of the work that was done from a totally illegitimate, unethical basis. Unfortunately, their goals were achieved, and they were able to displace Larry Agron and his political supporters, and essentially that was the beginning of the end. The project was essentially stripped of any design intent, and handed over to developers to essentially take it over and build it. So the whole vision was essentially collapsed, and I would say that the reason that I said this in the beginning was that the visionary who really drove this and dealt with the challenges that came about was displaced, and that's where the whole thing got off track.
And what were some of
I'll
your
also say that.
Sorry, go ahead.
If I can just add that the audit has been discredited. I mean, the state legislative auditor has already issued a report to say this audit was flawed. It was not an audit. It was essentially a crafted hit piece. And the auditor has been indicted, a very large auditing firm, national firm. And the case is just coming to a conclusion. The results will be published in January, and I happen to know what's going to happen, but I'm under confidentiality. But I think there's going to be very significant repercussions for the auditor and what he did, because it damaged a lot of people, including my company, in terms of the allegations. But it's taken, the audit came out at the beginning of 2014, so it's almost 6 years. But the wheels of justice move slowly, and I think the truth is going to come out.
What were some of your key takeaways from going through that process? Another way to ask it would be, if you had to do it over again, what would you do differently, if anything?
I honestly don't think I could. I don't think there's anything I could do differently. I think we put blood, sweat, and tears into the project in terms of the commitment and doing what we needed to do. I think ultimately, politics kind of stepped into the way, and I don't think there's anything we could have done to have changed it. I think the unfortunate result is that the public are really the losers in it all, and but I learned a lot. I think it's kind of given me perspective in taking on mega projects and perhaps trying to be proactive in terms of how to develop strategies and risk workarounds that can be dealt with early to try and head off some of these issues as projects like this are put forward.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. What is your thought process when you're developing a risk workaround? Like how do you think through that? If you don't mind taking a few minutes to walk us through that, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say to you, I guess one of my lessons learned is that unless you were Robert Moses in your periods in the 20s, right, where you were a politician who did whatever it could take, I think that's not possible today. But I would suggest that mega projects undertaken by a politician are extremely risky. I would put them very high on the risk scale of ever having to happen, just because of the time needed to get a mega project done. So in terms of my own personal goals is, I'm more focused now on projects that are public-private partnerships, but generally more led by the private sector versus the public sector, where the public sector is a partner, a very important partner. But my personal opinion is that to try and mitigate risk, I'm not saying it can't work through a purely public sector effort, but I do think that the triple Ps or the P3s, or a public-private partnership as they're called, is a really important element of risk mitigation as these mega projects are taken on. So I think that's one big lesson that I've learned through the work we've done. The other lesson learned is that the complexity of projects like this are not a typical development project, right? Where you may be doing a high-rise, very, very large dollar value building. Usually these mega projects have large areas to be dealt with, mixed uses. So the management and complexity of a mega project needs to be dealt with separately. And I think any entity, private or public, who undertakes it needs to really understand and be educated in what it takes to put this together, a mega project together. And I would say, in my mind, and we have a paradigm we use, that there are 7 kind of elements or functional areas of a mega project that need to be looked at independently. And then in addition to those 7 areas, which I'll go through in a minute, and in addition to those 7 areas, you really need a very competent, experienced program manager to coordinate these areas in an effective way to make sure that you're managing this to a safe and a safe landing, which I'll call, because it's like having a big plane up in the air. And you really need to know what you're doing to be able to land it to a successful conclusion. So there's really 8 areas, and I think it starts with a program manager that really knows and has dealt with these types of issues. And then just to go through the 7 areas, functional areas, that I'll just enunciate that we found work together. The first obvious one is the design. And the design is usually very complex, multiple design disciplines, engineers, architects, landscape architects, environmental architects. I mean, the design is usually, 20, 30 different design skill sets that need to be brought together and managed so they work towards the ultimate intent. The second one, and this is in no particular order of importance, I think they all need to work together like cylinders in an engine. But the second one is the political side of it, the political engagement, because these mega projects really need very, very close interface and connection and communication with the political bodies that are usually there to support the vision and to build the governmental, municipal, whatever it may take, facilitation of a project like this. So that political engagement is absolutely key to make sure that information's flowing, that perceptions are dealt with appropriately, because that's the reality of the situation. So that's the second silo. The third one is the financial strategy. And by financial strategy, it's all the stuff that have dollar signs in front of it. And it's, obviously it starts with the cost estimating, both the construction hard costs, the soft costs associated with it, and also the financing pro formas of, the returns on investment and what do financial institutions who usually come in to put the capital into these projects, how do they look at it? So that financial strategy is absolutely key to the success, and that's, to me, the third silo. The fourth silo is the legal side, because every one of these mega projects have huge legal implications and agreements and memorandums of understanding and term sheets, and that legal side usually has significant specialized disciplines that need to come to bear in terms of the legal experience and aspects that need to be dealt with. So that silo is as complex as anything else that needs to be pulled together, because ultimately it's those agreements that bind everyone together in that common cause. So that's the fourth one. The fifth one, and I'll separate this from the design, is, and I maybe should have teased this out, is really the nuts and bolts of the engineering. So, one big project we're working on has an active earthquake fault running through it that needs to be dealt with. The engineers that can determine what that means to the project and to the design of the project, and that goes to everything else. We're trying to go to net carbon zero. So, the resilience and the sustainability engineers who can look at what's happening, but also provide flexibility for the future. So that engineering support is important. And the sixth one is the community engagement, and really making sure that the public at large understand what is happening, because that's a key support mechanism to make sure that these mega projects come through, because they usually have very significant impacts on the community around it, or not only around it, much further. So really building that community engagement and support is key, because that's the fuel that the political group and that the developer usually needs to have. And I guess the third, but the last one, but not the least, is the entitlement strategy. Because, we work in California, probably one of the most difficult states to work in relative to getting entitlements and permits for mega projects. I think the entitlement strategy is key, because you could do everything else right, but if you don't handle your environmental impacts appropriately, if you don't deal with the bodies that you need to get approvals through, whether it's Coastal Commission or State Lands Commission or Corps of Engineers, you could also get stymied. So that entitlement strategy is a key. And so these 7 strands, I'll call it, all weave into one project, a cable, I like to think of it, but each strand is really important to build the strength of the overall cable as you move forward, or the project as you move forward. And I think the program manager's skill set that they bring to the table is the ability to really manage these different and divergent expertise that come to bear to really move towards this common goal of the project that's envisioned.
Yeah, that I like the analogy. I like the visual. And while some of these individual elements are pretty significant parts of a mega project, like the political engagement could be really a significant effort for a mega project, I think most, if not all of these elements scale down to even much smaller projects. So political engagement, if you're dealing with policymakers, authorities having jurisdiction, maybe if it's just the building inspector or the mayor of your town or the economic development council for your city, if you're doing a medium-sized project or a small project, even down to like a multifamily, you need to consider that it's more than just building. Let's say you're building an apartment building, senior living home, for example. You need more than just the construction part. You need the design to make sure that it fits with any sort of architectural review boards. You need political engagement to make sure that the policymakers are engaged and on their side. And I like what you said, that the perceptions are dealt with. And I want to come back to that in just a minute. Obviously, financial strategy, you have to have financing there. Legal needs to be in place for contracts, the actual detailed engineering, structural engineering, architecture, geotech, civil, etc. Community engagement. I've been involved with some projects where the community had some perceptions, and there were some well-connected community members that ended up stalling a $100 million project. It's hard to believe, but don't underestimate the importance of community engagement. And then, yeah, the entitlements, getting through permits, whether it's, I'm in the Midwest where the Department of Fish and Wildlife and migratory bat mitigation is huge. And if you have one tree that is potential habitat for the Indiana gray bat, then it doesn't matter how big your project is, it's going to stall out. So I appreciate you bringing that clarity to those 7 elements. But talk about the perceptions with political. You mentioned political engagement and managing the perceptions and making sure they're dealt with. Can you share an example of how you had to, or maybe it's a strategy of how you deal with perceptions, or an example of when you had to deal with a perception?
Yeah. So I'll also make a statement that I truly believe in, is that a mega project in today's environment, especially in California, where you can't ramrod anything through, needs to have what I call a quadruple bottom line to be successful as well. And it's the 4 P's, right? It's we talk about triple bottom line, TBL, but we've talked about a quadruple bottom line, 4 bottom lines, and to me, that's the 4 P's, right? Obviously, it's got to make money. So I'm not saying it's the most important, but profit is the first P. The second P is planet, and I think we all know that as a planet, we're facing an existential crisis right now relative to climate change. I'm a true believer in that. I'm in my mid-60s, and I have a grandchild and kids, and I worry about whether they're going to have the same quality of life I had. So I think any mega project today that's being built to last maybe hundreds of years has to consider that in everything that's done on the project, because it's going to have to deal with what we know is coming. So that's one. People is the third one, which is really about community, and how does this project benefit the community in terms of making a better life or better quality of life for the community around it and in general. And the fourth P is purpose. So, what is the real purpose behind the project? Because without purpose, these mega projects can fail. And I think these 4 bottom lines are something that has to be continually balanced. And when you talk about community engagement, what I have found is if you honestly believe in a mega project having a quadruple bottom line, and you walk the walk and talk that, you don't only talk the talk, but you walk the walk. I think that the honesty and integrity of the project speaks for itself. And I think that that aspect of it has to be communicated, and it has to be, the community and the politicians have to believe that as the visionary behind the project, that you really mean what you say and that you're going to carry that out. And that's where the face and the visionary that I mentioned to you is so important, because to the extent that individual goes through many years of building that credibility with all parties, the community and the politicians and everyone else, and that individual gets displaced or changed, it's very, very, very hard to recover, because the basis, the rug has almost been pulled out from under it. So to me, that integrity is really important, and that communication and that perception that's out there, and the face, as I call it, that's out there, is consistent and communicates the essence of what's trying to be accomplished.
And I made a note when you mentioned that one of the indicators of a high-risk project is that it's spearheaded by an individual politician, because if that person goes through under some sort of scrutiny or has some sort of public crisis, or they get displaced, then so as they go, so goes their visionary project. I think that also applies to working with, say, an individual in a company. Maybe you're working with a corporation, and if that project is being spearheaded by one person, maybe the rest of the board isn't engaged, that's a risky project. So just because one person in a company is behind it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the entire company is behind it. And let me ask you this. Some people have the misconception that when they are, as a contractor, when they're working for a large company, or they're doing a municipal or a government project at whatever the scale is, they feel like they're working with an organization. But ultimately, do a lot of these projects come down to one person, or either an idea from one person or the influence of one person? What do you think? Are companies, are contractors working with a large organization, or does it really just come down to a small number, or maybe just one person?
Yeah, I truly believe people don't work with companies, they work with people. And, what I've learned is you can have the best company in the world that you're working with, but if you aren't working with the right people within that company, you lost. I mean, it's never going to work. So we really focus on the individuals more than the company. Obviously, larger, credible, experienced companies have those resources internally. But I think one of the success factors also that weave into this as a program manager is your experience and ability to make sure you're bringing the best to the table and you're securing the best for the duration of the phase that you're particularly in. So absolutely agree with what you're saying. It's about who you're dealing with, the people, and not the company. It's and usually it is a few people. But I would also say to you, just to maybe expand on that, a project, by the phases of a project, once you secure your entitlements, there's a certain tipping point where the visionary could actually relinquish or move out, but the die's cast and the project is already on track, and it's hard to dislodge it. So I think the early phases of the project, there's way more risk, and I think it diminishes as the project moves into more of an execution mode. But some of these projects take decades to actually get completed. I mean, I'm personally working on a project which I hope will be my legacy. It's called Seaport San Diego. it's a 70-acre waterfront redevelopment that I think is going to be totally transformational for the country, I believe, in terms of the quadruple bottom line that we're aiming at and dealing with educating the public on climate change. But it's a 10-year project from when we started, best case, until it's actually in place. So, but the riskiest portions of that are during, I'd say the first 3-4 years of the project as it moves down through its life cycle. So, that's where it's really important that the people stay in place and that you have people that are there for the duration.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of teams and people, you are involved with bringing not only the design team, but also the construction teams to the table for these projects. What are some red flags that you look for when considering bringing a general contractor or a construction management firm to a project? Are there any red flags that you watch out for?
Yeah, so we are totally an advocate and proponent of IPD, of integrated project design. It means that the contractor who's actually going to build the project is brought on board very, very early and very integrated into everything that's happening. A big red flag for me is contractors, because unfortunately our industry historically has been very much about competitive bid and low price and change orders and all the other stuff we all know is a cancer in the industry. I think a big red flag is to make sure that the contractor or the team you've selected is compatible with that philosophy in terms of the spirit of the team and how the project's going to get delivered. And that, obviously pricing is important, but it's not looking for the lowest possible price that you can get. That's a fair price, because construction, as we all know, isn't going into a store and buying a product. You're going to live with getting the product built, and there's no free lunch. So if you're not paying what you should be paying for the product, you're not going to get the product you want. So I think the selection process of bringing the right contractor, and again, not only the contractors, I've said earlier, the right people to the table who really believe in that is critical. And I think maybe a kind of a ancillary to that is technology in mega projects, and the fact that these mega projects are highly complex, and to think of the old way things got done relative to blueprints and design, and I think to me everything's moving into the digital world. We dreamt about it many years ago, but I think it's now truly here, where we can do what we call VDC, or virtual design and construction, so that you don't have to have everything built in the field as a prototype and deal with any issues in the field. I think today we're actually able to do those virtually through a virtual design and construction that gets ultimately linked to cost and schedule and energy costs and operational and maintenance. So I think the other red flag is that if that tool is not deployed to the project very early on to make sure that you're managing it appropriately in terms of the data and the design and the cost, that's the other big red flag I'd kind of point out as a item to watch for.
The first red flag you mentioned was looking for contractors who didn't really have the right approach, attitude, or spirit. And ultimately, we're talking about people. So what is one of your favorite questions to ask during the selection process or during an interview with a contractor to suss out whether or not they have that right attitude or spirit?
I would say it's not to the person, but I usually try and speak to people that have worked with the company and worked with that person. And it usually goes to subcontractors, to designers, to collaborators to say, hey, tell me a little bit about Joe Blow, right? How did they react to problems? How were they to work with? Were they problem solvers? I would tend to do a 360 to kind of see if this person's a team player. And to me, questions are important. I mean, I think subliminally, if someone's telling you the truth, but I think especially in interviews, people tend to want to tell you what you want to hear. And usually they know what's at stake. So to me, what's more important is that you spend the time to do the 360, check them out really well, see what their, I'll call it integrity, but I'll say, people, a big red flag for me is when you find people who move around a lot, right? They may be with a company for a year or 18 months and they jump ship and they're somewhere else. That's a big red flag, right? So personally, and maybe this is just a personal predisposition, I'd look for a fairly mature person. I'd look for someone who's actually shown the ability to tough it out, because resiliency in a job is really important, because you know that they've obviously been through the ringer, they've dealt with issues, they've solved problems, they can deal with adversity. So I think it's more about checking that out than listening to or getting the right answers to questions.
That's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. During the interview, during the dog and pony show, when the contractors have brought all of their team in and everybody is at their best putting on their presentation, what are you really looking for or listening for during the formal presentation?
So I generally look to make sure that it's been really well choreographed and rehearsed and comes across as a real well-oiled machine that's been put together. And I say that with somewhat of a little bit of skepticism, because it's important to see that, because when you see that, you know that this team has sweated the details. They've been through practices. They're professional. They're committed. They've spent the money to put their best foot forward. But I also approach it with a huge amount of suspicion, because we all know that these high-level mega projects have a lot at stake, and usually there's months of work that's gone into that presentation. It's almost like a play that goes to Broadway, and you know that there's been months of practice, and if someone doesn't smile enough, they tell them, you better smile more because you're not coming across right. And they have red teams who actually prepare them to watch the interviewees and make sure that they're saying the right things and acting the right way. So I always look at it somewhat as a play and as something that's been very well rehearsed, but it's still important that get done, because if a team can't do that, you already know that they're not dedicating the resources and that this isn't as important. So I tend to almost look at it as the show, but you got to dig deeper to ultimately make your decision, because it's usually a veneer that's been practiced and may or may not be real.
Yeah. That makes sense. If they can't put together a well choreographed, well planned, well organized presentation, then that doesn't bode well for the execution of the project, right?
Exactly.
So let me ask you this: if you could ask one person one question, well, let me be less specific. If you could only talk to one person on the construction management firm's team during the interview, who is the one person that you would question? If, let's say, you had 15 minutes, you could pull this person aside and ask them some questions. Who's the one person that you would question?
Obviously, it's the lead. It's it's not in our business, there's the project executive who is kind of the guy sitting in corporate office who you call if there's a problem. But I'd want to talk to the person who's going to be the quarterback for their team in terms of who that person is. And I do like to spend time with them. I do like to understand their full background. Where did they grow up, and where did they live, and what school did they go to, and what sports did they play, and how long have they been with the company, and what's important to them as a person. And I try and go as deep as possible, right down to their family, and where did they come from, etc. So to me, that's who's ultimately you're going to be dependent on to deal with the issues below that may come up. So I'd want to go out for a meal with them. I'd want to go out for a beer with them. I'd want to try and get a little deeper under the surface in terms of who that person is. And I have an old saying that if you're not comfortable going out for a beer with someone or inviting them to your home, you shouldn't be embarking on a project with them, because that's ultimately what it comes down to in terms of relationships.
Interesting. Very interesting. So some people would say that these decisions are 100% based on facts. It's 100% financial, or it's 100% quantitative. In your opinion, what percentage is quantitative based on things that can be counted, and how much is qualitative? Something that the gut feeling, the thing that you can't really put your finger on.
Yeah, I think a lot is. I think I say passion and persistence trumps intellect and good grades any day, right? So to me, I'm not the smartest person, but I'm pretty tenacious. And, I think those less quantitative aspects of a person's personality and work ethic and everything else are more important than the quantitative than the quantitative aspects, because when the going gets tough, you want to make sure there's someone with you who is going to be able to deal with the tough times, right? We do a lot of work. I have a huge amount of respect for people who come out of the military, and I think it is a different mindset, right? It's a mindset of service. It's a mindset of higher purpose. It's a mindset of often dealing with adversity, extreme adversity. We have a number of Navy SEALs. San Diego's a Navy SEAL town, and worked with a number of Navy SEALs. And, these are guys who don't have formal educations that we've brought into our company that are the best project managers I've ever worked with, right? Because they don't expect a smooth road ahead. Otherwise they wouldn't. They expect challenges, and they pride themselves on their ability to deal with a challenge, whatever it may be. So I think those qualitative aspects of a team make way more sense than the university they went to, or the quantitative aspects that may be looked at.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I like that. Navy SEALs make good project managers because they're certainly used to working in austere environments and less than stellar conditions. That's
yeah. There's a book that I've read that it really influenced me. It's called Extreme Ownership by a guy called Jocko Willink. Mm-hmm. I'd recommend it to anyone because it really shows how their world really translates into the business world, and why they are who they are, and why they made it out the other end of Hell Week and the work they have to do. And I think it goes very deep. It's not physical strength, it's mind strength, and it's an aspect that's hard to define, but it's I was talking to one guy, he said if you're in Hell Week, if you quit, then you're out. And I was trying to understand from him, what did that mean? What does quitting mean? So he said, well, let me give you an example. We just been on, I don't know, a 15-mile run, and we came back and they told us, jump in the pool with your full kit and swim another 20 laps. And, you do what you're told. Jumped in the pool and he started swimming, and he got about 3/4 of the way through, and he said, I just couldn't go anymore. My arms wouldn't work. And he said, I had a choice. I could raise my hand and say, I quit. I want to get out of the pool, or I could drown. And he said, the next thing I remember was seeing the bottom of the pool coming towards me, because I blacked out. And the next thing I was out of the pool, with them pumping water out of my chest. But he was prepared to drown before he quit, which to me just showed what that means, right? It means that you'll go to the limit before you quit.
Yeah, I love that
and
book.
I think it's an amazing book.
Yeah, I teach a lot of the concepts in extreme ownership. I've also listened to the follow-along book called The Dichotomy of Leadership, which is fascinating stuff too. And yeah, I agree. I think the game is really mental. I tell the business owners that I work with that you are your own worst enemy, and the game is won or lost between your ears. And the story you tell yourself and how you take ownership of your situation really determines a lot about your life and your business. So that is good stuff. I would love to interview. Actually, I had the opportunity to interview a former Navy SEAL a few years ago on the podcast, episode 32, Chris Fussell, and fascinating conversation. So I want to be a good steward of your time. We need to wrap this up shortly. One more question about presentations and interviews. We have a lot of contractors listening. If you could give one piece of advice to contractors when they're making a presentation or interviewing for a project, what would that one thing be?
Put yourself in the owner's chair and look at the interview as though you were the owner. And what is it you would like? What would you think the owner wants to hear? I think a lot of contractors come in with technical solutions and try and wow you on how good they are at putting schedules together. I think it's all important, but I think what's more important is maybe to talk about some examples of challenges you had that were unexpected, that could have sunk a project and that put the owner in a very difficult predicament, and how did you contribute to the solution for solving that problem? I think a lot of our team members tend to think in their own silo instead of lifting it up and starting to think about it in terms of the owner's perspective, because ultimately that's the top of the food chain. It's going to be the entity that makes the decision, or is the success ultimately. So I think it's to show how you fit into that machine. You're one cog. A contract is a very important cog in the machine, but it's important to explain how you see that role in terms of creating the solutions to deliver the project.
Yeah, I think what you said is so important. Put yourself in the owner's chair. What do they want to hear about? What are they really concerned about? What are the risks that are keeping them up at night? And chances are that list does not include how long you've been in business, the name of the founder of the company, how many employees you have, how many offices you have, your gross revenue for the last 3 years. They're not really concerned about that. That's not about them. So I think that's great advice. Talk more about the owner and what they're concerned about, and talk less about yourself. And also
exactly
sharing examples of, hey, here was a problem that came up and here's how we dealt with it. Great advice there.
I'll give you an example.
Sure.
BIM, building information modeling, it's been around for a long time, hugely powerful tool. But, you go into interviews and the architect will tell you what a great BIM user they are and how good it is for their project or their work, and the contractor does the same thing. But I often find they don't talk about the benefit to the owner. How are they going to translate that into benefit for the owner? And how does that really help in terms of the overall big picture, not only the owner, but the team? And how does it integrate into the team? So, that's where the value comes, and that shows the collaborative spirit of being more than just one gear in the machine.
Yeah, as I often say, everybody's favorite radio station is WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. That's what the owners are thinking. Yeah. What's in it for me? What is this team going to do for me? What's in it for me? And if what you're talking about in a presentation has nothing to do with what's in it for the owner and doesn't offer any value to the owner, they're probably not listening. They're probably going to check out. So good advice there. All right, one last question, and then we'll talk about actually what your company is in just a few minutes. But one question before we get to that is, what is one thing that you believe about business? Actually, I've got another follow-up question as well. So what's one thing you believe about business that some people would consider to be unconventional, maybe even crazy?
Empathy for everyone you're working with, right? I think people tend to think business needs to be cutthroat. I believe the opposite. I believe if you don't think of everyone in the system as needing to succeed from a business perspective, that you're not going to succeed. Even more so on mega projects because of the time frame and just the need to have people committed. So, the attention to others, obviously you need to watch out for yourself, but I think the attention to others in the team, on the team, in terms of, are they making money? Are they stressed? Do they have issues? I think it's really putting a focus into that as much as you put a focus into yourself and your own business making a success.
Great advice. Hence that plays into the whole philosophy behind integrated project delivery. Perfect. One question, I'm curious, what are you concerned about from a macro level when it comes to the construction industry as a whole? Based on where you're perched in the food chain on projects, and you look at the construction industry, what are you most concerned about?
The ability to change and to improve in terms of the way we get things done. I think, we all know, we've seen that curve. I forget what it looks like, just the increase in efficiency in manufacturing. And then you look at construction. And I think there's been very little improvement in construction efficiency over the last 50, 60 years. And it's because of the silos. And, to me, lean construction, which is a little bit of a buzzword as well, and IPD and all these other things are very important elements of our industry to be able to be successful and deliver, whether it's housing at a cheaper price, costs are just rising, labor's becoming more challenging to obtain. So I think what I'm most worried about is our industry's ability to change and to start looking at different ways to do things. And it's, it relates to the age of our industry. Most people you run into are in their 50s and 60s, but it's the millennials and the Gen Zs who are coming into the industry now, who are digital natives, who need to be brought up. But the older guys are not willing to change or to think of these changes. So that's very much what our company's focused on, is to try and create this transformational change in how projects are delivered.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that. If you would take a few minutes and talk about your company, and then if people want to follow you, connect with you, learn more about what you do, where can they go to do so?
So we have a fairly strong presence in the social networking media, LinkedIn and others. We have a group internally that's involved with that. My email is gaff@gaffcon.com. The gaffcon.com is our website. So I'm not a big Twitter user yet, but I'm thinking of doing it. But as a company, we're in our 33rd year now, and I started the company with the vision of helping owners deliver complex projects that power vibrant communities. So it's kind of a vision statement that we developed maybe 10 years ago to try and, as the company grew, to try and have people understand what it is we do, because when we were smaller, it was fairly easy for me to speak to everyone. But that vision statement was teased out of what we did and is found to be very relevant because it connects delivery of projects for owners, and it connects connection to communities. We call it vibrant communities because diversity is very much part of what we believe in, and that's what we do. We have four main pillars of work. We have our core services that we provide for large owners, where what we call a staff augmentation. So if a school district or university or a public agency has a large project to deliver, we come in to help them organize, plan, provide staffing, usually on a hybrid basis. So that's one pillar of our work. The second pillar of our work is technology to improve efficiency. And we have a very large group, a very robust group that's, I think, at the cutting edge. And we've always had a group internally that's done this, is to really deploy technology to improve the product and the process for owners through the entire life cycle. So it's not only construction, it's operations and maintenance. And we're heavily involved in some very, very large municipal infrastructure, private projects where we're deploying this to help owners. The third pillar is development, and I've always had a particular interest in development and developing projects that have meaning. So we have a separate development entity that gets involved as a principal in projects to help shape them and deliver them. And our fourth pillar is we call it legal support. It's really providing legal testimony, expert testimony in disputes that may have arisen. So, unfortunately, our industry is very rife with disputes, and because of the nature of our work, we feel we're in a good position to help the right side kind of resolve or deal with what they need to deal with. So whether it's delay disputes or a level of service that may have been provided, we would assist teams to really deal with that in the legal system. Those are our four main pillars of the work we do. We're about 180 people. We're privately held. My wife and I started the company. We've had a lot of big companies want to acquire us, but we're really not interested in that. Our intention is to convert the company to an ESOP, which we're in the process of trying to do, so that the benefits of the company are passed on as a legacy. The people who've helped build this company will really become the future owners, and they will pass it on to the next generation.
Amazing stuff. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast and share your experience, share the practical advice. It's been fantastic. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you inviting me on.
There you go. Be sure to check out Gaff's website at gaffcon.com, GAFCON.com. Hook up with him on LinkedIn. And don't forget, if you are a business owner or a leader and you want to get to the root cause of the problems in your business, you want to take it to the next level, you want to get clarity, you want to develop relationships with other construction business owners who will provide the accountability and the inspiration you need to take action, then consider coming to one of my advance events. The next one is coming up in Vegas, January 20th. You can get all the details at constructionbusinessaccelerator.com/advance, or you can send me a text, 859-667-2015, and I'll send you all the details. Don't forget, if you want to have a dead simple but very powerful tool for keeping track of all the communication on your job sites, then go to fieldchat.com/edge. Get your 15% off discount and get yourself in a position where you have the best documentation. Thanks so much for all the ratings and the reviews, the messages. If you could take a few minutes to do two things for me, if you get value out of this podcast. Number one, if you could leave a rating and a review on the podcast player of your choice, whether it's Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcast, whatever it is. If you could leave a rating and review, that helps get the word out to more people. And then two, if you could share this podcast with somebody that you think would get value out of it. Send them a text, say, hey, you need to check out this podcast. I would appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for listening. Let me know how I can help you. My name is Todd DeWalt. Check out the resources I have available at constructionleadingedge.com, and I will see you next time.